For years, he was Australia's most wanted man. Tonight, Hakan AEK sits behind bars in a Turkish prison cell. The man accused of orchestrating a global drug empire was finally captured in Istanbul, the city where he had been hiding in plain sight after fleeing Sydney more than a decade earlier. It was a dramatic ending to one of Australia's longest and most embarrassing manhunts. A gangster so calculated, so confident, and so skilled at disappearing that it took authorities over 10 years to finally put their hands on him. But Hakan AEK was never just another criminal on the run. He was the man police openly described as Australia's most wanted fugitive, the alleged architect of an international trafficking network responsible for moving massive quantities of illicit drugs into the country. A figure whose name became legend in both law enforcement circles and the criminal underworld. And to the public, he became known by an almost surreal nickname: the Facebook gangster, the flashy biker. That label didn't come from rumor. It came from his own behavior. While police agencies across multiple countries hunted him, AEK was posting online, taunting authorities through social media, flaunting his freedom with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. It wasn't just reckless. It was calculated. Every post sent a message: "You're looking for me, and you still can't touch me." To understand how he reached that level of confidence, you have to rewind the story. Hakan AEK didn't emerge overnight. He wasn't born into notoriety, and he didn't start as a hardened criminal. In many ways, his rise mirrors the arc of a crime thriller protagonist. Intelligent, strategic, highly adaptive, and increasingly dangerous as his ambitions grew. He climbed the criminal ladder not through brute force, but through sharp instincts, carefully chosen alliances, and an uncanny ability to read people and systems. Over time, those skills transformed him from a connected operator into the head of one of the most powerful and sophisticated drug networks linked to Australia. His organization didn't rely on chaos. It relied on logistics, trust, and silence. And for years, it worked. Yet even as his profile grew, AEK stayed ahead of law enforcement. Warrants stacked up, task forces formed, surveillance tightened, and still he slipped through every net. When it became clear that Australia was no longer safe territory, he made his boldest move yet. He didn't retreat into obscurity. He exported his entire operation. And that's where the story takes a turn few expected. Instead of hiding in some remote corner of the world, AEK relocated to Istanbul, Turkey, a sprawling, chaotic global city where continents collide and millions move unnoticed every day. It was the perfect camouflage. In the noise, the crowds, and the constant motion, he reinvented himself, not as a fugitive, but as a man living openly behind a polished, flashy facade. Nightlife, luxury, confidence. A wanted criminal blending seamlessly into one of the world's busiest cities. For more than a decade, he stayed there, untouched, unarrested, watching as his name became myth back home. Until finally, the silence broke. And when Turkish authorities moved in, the illusion shattered. The Facebook gangster, the ghost who mocked police, the mastermind who vanished overseas. All of it collapsed in a single arrest. But the question remains, how did he evade capture for so long? And how close did he come to getting away forever? What looked like just another luxury hotel in the heart of Istanbul was, in reality, Hakan AEK's final fortress. From the outside, the King's Cross Hotel blended perfectly into the city's endless sprawl of neon lights, late-night cafes, and anonymous foot traffic. Tourists came and went. Staff kept their heads down. And behind that ordinary facade, Australia's most wanted fugitive slept comfortably, convinced the world had lost his trail. It sounded like the perfect cover. And for years it was. But this is where AEK's story begins to crack. Arrogant gangster, because the same arrogance that helped him rise to the top of the criminal food chain would ultimately be the flaw that exposed him. AEK grew careless, confident, lazy in ways only men who believe themselves untouchable ever do. And unknowingly, he began leaving behind a breadcrumb trail that authorities had been chasing for more than a decade. Before we get to how that trail finally led police straight to his door, we need to rewind back to the moment Hakan AEK first emerged from the shadows. His ascent was fast, relentless, and almost surgical. In 2008, Australian law enforcement intercepted what would become a landmark drug seizure at Jandakot Airport near Perth. A small aircraft had landed carrying an estimated $7 million worth of illicit cargo, methamphetamine and ecstasy tablets packed and ready for distribution. It wasn't just another bust. It was the largest drug seizure in Western Australia's history at the time. And sitting just behind it all was a name that would soon terrify police briefings nationwide. AEK. Back then, he wasn't the myth he would later become. He was just another emerging figure in Australia's underworld. On paper, he fit a familiar profile, Middle Eastern background, loosely associated with organized crime networks that had operated quietly for years. But investigators quickly realized something about him didn't match the usual pattern. AEK wasn't brutal, he wasn't reckless, and he wasn't driven by ego alone. He was strategic. Where others relied on violence to climb, AEK relied on leverage. He didn't just move drugs, he built systems. He cultivated relationships. He studied supply chains like a corporate executive studies markets. And that mindset transformed him from a local player into something far more dangerous. His most decisive move came when he aligned himself with the Chinese Triads, one of the most powerful, disciplined, and secretive criminal organizations in the world. That partnership cracked open an endless pipeline of narcotics flowing toward Australia. Supply was no longer the problem. Distribution was next. To solve that, AEK forged another alliance, this time with Daxa Guru, an enforcer connected to a notorious outlaw bikie gang. Together, they formed a machine that seemed unstoppable. The Triads supplied the product, the bikies controlled the streets, and AEK sat quietly at the center, coordinating it all. By 2010, federal agencies were convinced he was responsible for a significant percentage of the drugs flooding into Australia. Intelligence files grew thicker, surveillance intensified, arrest plans were drafted, but every time the net tightened, AEK slipped through, and then, without warning, he vanished. No farewell, no arrests, no mistakes. AEK disappeared completely, lifting his entire operation off Australian soil and relocating overseas. For years, he became a ghost, untouchable, untraceable, a name spoken in frustration inside police task forces. His destination shocked investigators. Not a remote village, not a forgotten border town. He chose Turkey, a country positioned at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and the Middle East, where jurisdictions blur, identities overlap, and international cooperation moves painfully slow. For a man like AEK, it was the perfect hiding place. And for a long time it worked. The brutal downfall of the Facebook gangster. But the question investigators never stopped asking was simple and chilling. How long could a man who loved attention resist being seen? Because the higher AEK climbed, the more visible he became. And eventually, the fortress he believed protected him would become the very thing that betrayed him. And that's when the hunt truly began. He was once labeled Australia's most wanted man. Tonight, Hakan AEK sits behind bars in a Turkish prison cell. For more than a decade, he was a ghost, a name whispered in police briefings, a shadow blamed for a global drug pipeline pumping poison into Australia. AK wasn't just another trafficker. Investigators called him the architect of an international narcotics empire, a man so elusive, so confident, that it took authorities over 10 years to finally corner him. And when they did, it wasn't in a jungle hideout or a desert compound. It was Istanbul, a city of chaos, commerce, and camouflage. A perfect place to disappear if you're smart enough. But AK wasn't just smart. He was arrogant, and that arrogance would become his undoing. To understand how one man managed to outmaneuver Australian law enforcement for over a decade, you have to rewind the clock. Long before the arrest, before the headlines, before the whispers, Hakan AEK didn't emerge as a hardened criminal overnight. He wasn't born into infamy. In fact, those who crossed paths with him early on described someone who looked less like a gangster and more like a crime thriller protagonist. Sharp, calculated, ambitious, and dangerously confident. He climbed the criminal ladder not through brute force, but through strategy, connections, timing, patience. Instead of laying low, AK lived like a king. Supercars, luxury hotels, private travel, lavish holidays, the kind of lifestyle that turns heads. And slowly, fatally, it drew attention. What ultimately exposed him wasn't an informant or a wiretap. It was his own ego. While most fugitives erased themselves from the digital world, AEK did the opposite. He flaunted his success. Social media became his stage. Investigators eventually traced a public Instagram account belonging to his wife, filled with photos of exotic locations, luxury vehicles, and unmistakable glimpses of a man hiding behind a new identity. A new name, a new life, but the same face. Wedding photos, hotel interiors, videos shot inside Istanbul's King's Cross Hotel. Piece by piece, the illusion collapsed. The Facebook gangster, as police had quietly begun calling him, had documented his own downfall. And as authorities closed in, they realized something chilling. AK wasn't just a drug dealer. He was the head of what law enforcement now calls the Aussie Cartel, a multinational criminal syndicate spanning continents, blending organized crime groups into a single coordinated machine. This wasn't chaos. This was corporate-level crime. Structured, disciplined, ruthless. A global empire built on silence, money, and drugs. For years, he had mocked the idea of capture. Now, the evidence was suffocating. Surveillance, digital trails, financial records. The walls were closing in. But the story doesn't end with his arrest. The mastermind. Because the empire he built didn't vanish with him. And the question investigators are still asking is this: was Hakan AEK the mastermind or just the face of something far bigger? That's where this story turns darker. Long before his name surfaced in courtrooms and intelligence briefings, long before investigators began calling him a linchpin of Australia's drug economy, Hakan AEK was already building something dangerous in the shadows. In the early 2000s, while law enforcement was focused on street-level dealers and familiar crime families, AEK was quietly positioning himself for something much bigger. At this stage, he was already deeply embedded in the drug trade, moving methamphetamine and ecstasy into Australia through established smuggling routes. But confidence breeds ambition, and ambition demands scale. As his profits grew and his appetite expanded, AEK realized that relying on traditional local networks would eventually expose him. If he wanted longevity, insulation, and power, he needed access to something far more formidable than domestic suppliers. That realization marked a turning point. Instead of fighting for scraps in Australia's crowded underworld, AEK reached outward, far outward. He began forging alliances with criminal syndicates that didn't just dominate cities or countries, but entire continents. The Russian Mafia, the Chinese Triads, Mexican cartels whose names were whispered even inside law enforcement agencies. These were organizations with their own armies, their own logistics pipelines, and decades of blood-soaked experience controlling the global drug trade. These weren't partnerships handed out lightly. So how did AEK get through the door? Connections. AEK possessed a rare skill in the criminal world. He could speak multiple languages of crime. He understood how different syndicates operated, what they valued, and how to align interests without provoking suspicion. He wasn't a reckless enforcer or a flashy psychopath. He was a negotiator, a broker, a strategist. And slowly, deal by deal, he began stitching together something unprecedented. What emerged wasn't just a supply chain. It was a coalition. Under AEK's guidance, disparate criminal organizations began working in parallel, coordinated rather than competing. Drugs flowed from producers to distributors with fewer bottlenecks. Money moved through laundering channels designed to blur jurisdictional boundaries. Australia, once considered a distant end market, became a central hub in a multinational criminal syndicate. This was the birth of what investigators would later label the Aussie cartel. It wasn't a single gang. It was a superstructure, Australian criminals acting as the connective tissue between global drug producers and one of the most lucrative consumer markets in the world. And at the center of it all was AEK, orchestrating operations with the mindset of a corporate executive rather than a street criminal. But empires like this don't survive on drugs alone. To function at this scale, AEK needed something even more valuable than product: access. Access to ports, airports, shipping containers, customs databases, and security blind spots. This is where the operation crossed from criminal into institutional corruption. Investigators would later identify the presence of doors, insiders embedded within legitimate systems. Airport workers, port officials, logistics coordinators, people paid to look the other way, or worse, actively assist. These insiders became the arteries of the empire. Shipments that should have been intercepted sailed through unchecked. Containers flagged for inspection mysteriously cleared. Even when law enforcement closed in, the cartel's machinery kept moving. And it didn't stop with narcotics. As the cartel expanded, so did its portfolio. Money laundering networks grew increasingly complex. Illegal gambling operations quietly generated clean cash. Intelligence reports would later suggest links to human trafficking and other transnational crimes. The operation had become self-sustaining, insulated by layers of corruption, intimidation, and silence. But no empire rises uncontested. Behind the scenes, Australia's underworld was boiling. Rival gangs watched AEK's influence spread with unease. Old alliances fractured. Turf wars simmered just beneath the surface. While others fought violently for territory, AEK fought strategically for infrastructure. Power, to him, wasn't about dominance. It was about permanence. Law enforcement, meanwhile, was catching on. Australian authorities knew they were facing something different. This wasn't a single kingpin with a handful of lieutenants. This was a network designed to survive arrests, seizures, even internal betrayal. Every time investigators thought they were close, AEK slipped further into the shadows, moving assets, people, and operations across borders faster than warrants could follow. And yet, even as the walls began closing in, AEK kept expanding. Because in the criminal world, standing still is fatal. And AEK understood one brutal truth better than most. To stay ahead of the police, you don't just run faster. You build something so vast, so interconnected, that bringing it down would require tearing through entire systems. What authorities didn't yet know was that the very ambition that built his empire would eventually expose it. And when that exposure came, it wouldn't start with drugs or guns. It would start with arrogance. Outsmarting rivals was never optional for AEK. It was survival. Every move he made was calculated, every alliance deliberate. To stay on top, he constantly adapted, reshaping his tactics and expanding his web of relationships with people who could keep him one step ahead in a game where hesitation meant extinction. And the scale of what he built was staggering. Investigators would later estimate that the Aussie cartel was responsible for nearly 1/3 of all drug importations into Australia. That wasn't just dominance. That was market control. With its sprawling global supply chain, the cartel was generating billions of dollars annually. Money powerful enough to buy silence, influence policy, corrupt institutions, and erase obstacles with frightening efficiency. This wasn't street crime. This was corporate-level criminal enterprise. The resources at their disposal were immense, and with that wealth came confidence. The kind that makes men believe they are untouchable. But power always attracts attention. And by this point, Australian authorities were no longer guessing who was behind the flood of narcotics poisoning the country. They knew, and they weren't backing down. The Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, the ACIC, made dismantling the Aussie cartel a top priority. Their problem wasn't motive or evidence. It was access. How do you catch a man who never stays in one place? How do you penetrate a criminal network that stretches across continents, languages, and jurisdictions? This wasn't policing. It was a slow-burning war of attrition. Time became the one variable AEK couldn't control. As months turned into years, intelligence analysts began tracking patterns, financial movements, travel anomalies, whispers from foreign agencies. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the walls began to close in. What AEK viewed as invisibility was, in reality, a tightening net. But AEK wasn't just fighting the police. He was navigating a battlefield crowded with rival gangs, competing syndicates, and underworld power brokers, all hungry for territory. Betrayals happened quietly. Turf wars flared and vanished just as fast. Yet AEK remained different. He didn't chase chaos. He engineered growth, expansion, control. Still, no empire grows forever. Behind the scenes, law enforcement was digging deeper, targeting the infrastructure that made the cartel function. And that's when they began to uncover the hidden machinery that kept AEK's operation alive. The insiders. Known in law enforcement circles as doors, these were people embedded inside airports, ports, freight companies, and customs facilities. Individuals willing to look the other way or actively assist in moving illegal shipments undetected. These insiders were the cartel's lifeblood, ensuring that even as scrutiny intensified, drugs continued flowing into Australia. AEK didn't leave this to chance. He invested heavily in corruption, placing the right people in the right positions. And it worked. For years. But drugs were only one revenue stream. The Aussie cartel was also deeply entrenched in money laundering, illegal gambling, and human trafficking. Its operations were so refined that entire segments functioned autonomously, generating income without direct oversight. On paper, it looked unstoppable. Yet pressure was mounting. By the early 2010s, the ACIC intensified its focus, zeroing in on AEK's international connections. That's where the cracks began to show. Intelligence agencies noticed something unusual. Back in 2008 and 2009, AEK was just another rising figure in the criminal landscape. And yet, he had somehow forged ties with some of the most powerful drug syndicates on the planet. That wasn't luck. Law enforcement analysts questioned how a relatively young Australian criminal managed to secure alliances with organizations that usually dealt only with equals. The conclusion was unsettling. AEK wasn't just connected, he was trusted. To take him down, authorities knew they had to move carefully. One misstep could collapse years of work. So instead of charging in, they listened. They waited. And they followed the digital breadcrumbs. Encrypted communication became the next battleground. Cipher phones, virtually untraceable devices used exclusively by criminals, allowed figures like AEK to operate in total secrecy. Calls couldn't be intercepted. Messages self-destructed. For organized crime, they were a dream. For police, a nightmare. But even encrypted systems leave shadows. As international cooperation intensified, agencies began correlating financial data, movement logs, and communication metadata. Slowly, the picture sharpened. The Aussie cartel wasn't invincible. It was exposed. What followed was one of the most relentless global manhunts in Australian criminal history. Multiple countries, shared intelligence, financial surveillance, digital monitoring. Every move AEK made was now being watched, analyzed, and cataloged. His empire, once sleek and untouchable, was under siege. The pursuit is far from over. But one thing is now clear. No matter how powerful, no matter how wealthy, no matter how connected, time eventually catches up. And for Hakan AEK, the day of reckoning is no longer a question of if. It's a question of when. The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club is one of the most famous groups and easily the largest motorcycle club in the world, with a membership of over 6,467 chapters in 59 different countries. You might be wondering what makes this motorcycle club so special. Well, there are several reasons why anyone would want to join the Hells Angels. While a love of motorcycles is easily one of the most common motives, a sense of belonging, especially in an infamous club once shrouded in an aura of mystery and respect, is another. From a distance, the Hells Angels seem so cool, and it's easy for many to be enticed into wanting to join. However, joining this club isn't for the faint-hearted. Since many do not make the cut, becoming a full member of the Hells Angels can take a really long time, sometimes spanning years. To become a member of the Hells Angels, candidates are first expected to be true motorcycle enthusiasts. They must also own a valid driver's license and a motorcycle of over 750 cubic centimeters, as the average member is expected to ride at least 20,000 kilometers a year in strict formation. Candidates are also required to drive US-built motorcycles, with Harley-Davidson, Indian, and Victory being the most common brands. Prospective members who have applied to be law enforcement officers, such as prison guards or police, are excluded from the club. Child molesters are also not allowed. The initiation process starts with a candidate passing the above criteria. Once that is out of the way, the candidate, now considered a prospective member, enters the stage of being deemed a hangaround. As a hangaround, prospective members are invited to meet older club members at some club meetings, and this stage could last for a long time. If the hangaround still shows interest at this stage, they are then deemed an associate. They remain classified this way for a year or two. After these years pass, an associate is reclassified as a prospect and is now allowed to fully participate in some of the club's activities. However, they do not have voting privileges since the initiation process is still underway. If the prospect proves they have what it takes, they are then upgraded to full membership or full patch, which is the last phase of the initiation process. The full patch refers to the club's four-piece insignia given to its members. This includes the Death Head logo, two rockers, a top rocker with the words Hells Angels, and a bottom rocker showing the country, state, or charter location. Rectangular MC patch beneath the wings of the Death Head signifies Motorcycle Club. Prospects are only allowed to wear the bottom rocker along with the MC patch. The final stage of becoming a full member begins with the voting process. A prospect can only become a full member or full patch when they are unanimously voted in by all full members of the club. Hence, a prospect is often required to travel across chapters in their country and introduce themselves to other members. Voting becomes easier once these members have gotten to know the prospect and have vetted them. The prospect must receive 100% of the votes, as a single vote against them means the prospecting stage continues until they are fully voted in. Once they have been voted in, prospects are required to reaffirm their loyalty to the club, and the Hells Angels rocker is finally awarded to them as the final part of the initiation ceremony. At this stage, known as being patched, prospects become full members. Full members of the Hells Angels are recognized by their infamous insignia, the full patch, but this remains the property of the club, not the member, even after the initiation process. The club's official colors are red lettering on a white background, leading to the nickname the Red and White. Members wear their patches on leather or denim jackets and vests. Some members wear an AFFA patch, meaning Angels Forever, Forever Angels, indicating lifelong membership. Another patch consists of two Nazi-style SS lightning bolts beneath the words Filthy Few, worn by select members. According to the club, this patch is a type of merit badge awarded to members who are first to arrive at and last to leave a party. However, some law enforcement officers allege that this patch is worn by members who have committed or are willing to commit murder on behalf of the club. In some cases, members may wear patches that signify their rank within the organization. These small, rectangular patches display the titles of the members in red letters on a white background. Common titles include President, Sergeant-at-Arms, Treasurer, Vice President, and more. If a member is ejected from the club or chooses to leave, they are required to return their patches to the club. Members are expected to pay dues that finance burials and motorcycle runs. Attendance at club meetings and motorcycle runs is also mandatory. Contrary to popular belief, most Hells Angels members are not drug addicts. The club prohibits intravenous drug use, and many members are known to be fitness enthusiasts. According to Jay Dobbins, an investigative agent who went undercover and infiltrated the Hells Angels from 2001 to 2003, the club has strict rules concerning interactions with women. Wives or girlfriends of members are strictly off limits, and violations of this rule are met with severe, often violent, consequences. Dobbins also mentioned that members are not allowed to speak to one another while wearing sunglasses. Additionally, members must remove their riding gloves before shaking hands. Prospects are forbidden from patting a member's back or touching the Hells Angels patch, with severe consequences for breaking this rule. Those who leave the club on bad terms have all possessions related to the club taken away from them, including the removal of tattoos that indicate club affiliation. Prospects, along with members' girlfriends and wives, are allowed to wear the number 81, which stands for Support 81, with 8 representing H and 1 representing A. The Hells Angels do not have an overall president. Instead, the club is governed by regional officers representing localized chapters at monthly meetings. These chapters have a degree of autonomy regarding minor policy changes and member discipline. Rankings in the club's organization include president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, sergeant-at-arms, and road captain, each carrying out significant duties. Responsibilities within their chapters vary, and regional officers are divided into 2 groups. The first group comprises those who attend the West Coast Officers Meeting, also known as WESCOM. The Westcom group is charged with conducting the policy actions and affairs of the Hells Angels chapters in the Western United States. The second group includes those who attend the East Coast Officers Meeting, or ECOM, which governs the chapters in the Eastern United States. Although the Hells Angels' founding location was in San Bernardino, California, its unofficial founding location eventually moved to Oakland, California, under the leadership of Sonny Barger, who succeeded Otto Friedli as the de facto national president. This shift made the Oakland chapter one of the most prominent and regarded as first among equals due to Barger's reputation. The Oakland chapter has the largest membership of any chapter in the United States and is responsible for major decision-making within the club. Any other motorcycle club wishing to be affiliated with the Hells Angels must first apply to the Oakland chapter for membership and be monitored and approved by them before being granted membership. The Hells Angels' traditional motto is Angels Forever, Forever Angels. They also have other slogans, such as, when we do right, nobody remembers. When we do wrong, nobody forgets. 3 can keep a secret if 2 are dead. And when in doubt, knock them out, the latter coined by New York City chapter member Vincent Big Vinny Girolamo. Joining the Hells Angels is far from easy. Prospective members often spend years on a wait list and devote their remaining years as full members to the club. The Hells Angels are not a casual, recreational group. For many members, joining is one of the best experiences of their lives. But leaving the club is a different matter altogether. Members can only leave if they are expelled, as there is no concept of retirement, except in rare cases where certain members are allowed to depart. Still, some have taken the daring step to leave. One notable example is George Christie. I felt we became the people we rebelled against, and that's exactly what I told them at the meeting when I left, Christie said. At one time, we would interact with all the clubs up and down the coast, and by 2011, we were fighting every major outlaw bike club in the United States, plus law enforcement. That's where some people lost perspective of what the initial intent was of the whole outlaw lifestyle. It seemed more military, like an army fighting another army. Christie was a Hells Angels leader for 35 years out of a 40-year membership. He was drawn to the outlaw biker lifestyle as a kid in the mid-1950s when he first saw a long-haired, denim-jacketed biker riding through the streets without a care in the world. Christie described that moment as life-changing. What truly fueled his interest, however, was an incident during high school when his principal accused him of cheating because he scored highly on an IQ test. Christie, who did poorly in school, thought, "If this is a polite society, no thank you," as he left the principal's office. After high school, Christie joined the Marine Corps. When he was discharged, he bought a motorcycle and started hanging out with other biker groups, such as the Satan Slaves and Question Marks, though his ultimate dream was to join the Hells Angels. By 1976, Christie had become a full patch member, and soon after, he rose in rank, founding the Ventura, California chapter in 1978 and even carrying the Olympic torch during the 1984 Los Angeles Games. Despite being a high-ranking member, Christie also worked for the Department of Defense. In 1978, his co-workers discovered he was a Hells Angels leader, a fact that came to light during a brutal conflict with a rival group involving fights, shootings, and bombings, which led to his resignation. Trouble followed Christie. He was later charged with orchestrating a murder-for-hire plot involving a leader of the Mexican Mafia prison gang. While in prison, Christie learned that rival clubs did not fight each other behind bars, which motivated him to push for peace on the streets. By the time he was acquitted in 1987, Christie had already started negotiating peace between rival motorcycle clubs. His efforts seemed successful until the 2002 Laughlin River Run, an annual motorcycle rally in Nevada, where a brawl between the Mongols and Hells Angels left 3 people dead. By 2011, the Hells Angels were embroiled in conflicts with nearly every major outlaw motorcycle club and law enforcement. Christie wanted the wars to end, but others did not share his vision. "I felt that groups were fracturing off, doing their own thing, if you will. It was tough," he said. "I decided that if I stayed in the club, it would strictly be ego-driven. I didn't want to be the guy who used to be a Hells Angels leader." In 2011, Christie made his decision to leave. He walked into a club meeting, announced his departure, removed his patches, and laid them on the table. His final words to his former club members were, "We have become the people that we rebelled against, and I'm gone." While Christie argued that he followed protocols and formally quit the club, it appeared that attempting to leave was a mistake. He was soon accused of being an informant, and his status was changed to out bad, meaning he was no longer in good standing with the Hells Angels and could not have any relations or contact with other members. In essence, he had been excommunicated from the club. Christie claimed he was shamed on social media and faced accusations from people, including strangers. The sense of kinship and community that had initially spurred Christie to join the outlaw biker lifestyle was stripped from him simply because he chose to leave. In an interview, Christie was asked why being out bad still seemed to bother him. His response was, "Being out bad with no contact in the outlaw motorcycle world is like a stigma. They don't want people interacting with you. They don't want people talking to you. Club members, who I was friendly with after I left, had their memberships in jeopardy if they communicated with me." He continued, "When I left, it kind of reminded me of a divorce. At first, everyone wanted to be amiable. They weren't happy about my decision, but they understood it. As things progressed, it became aggressive, and it was hard to take. The phone rings and you pick up, and it's one of your former brothers telling you you're no longer a friend to us. That's my whole life, because I didn't have many friends outside the club. It was a hard pill to swallow." George Christie wasn't the only one to suffer this tragic fate after leaving the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. "My name is Jay Dobbins. I'm a retired undercover federal agent, and I infiltrated the Hells Angels," said Jay Dobbins, who infiltrated the Hells Angels between 2001 and 2003. Dobbins, a former football player and athlete, decided to join the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms (ATF) after surviving a critical shooting during an operation in 1987. By 2002, when the war between the Hells Angels and the Mongols was at its peak, federal law enforcement launched an undercover operation called Operation Black Biscuit. Dobbins, posing as a gun runner and debt collector, went by the name Jay Davis and was known to gang members as Jaybird. Dobbins staged a fake murder to gain the Hells Angels' trust. A law enforcement officer posed as a Mongols biker, covered in lamb blood and brains, and was laid in a shallow grave for photographs and videos. Dobbins mailed the bloodstained Mongols patch to the Hells Angels, impressing the leadership so much that they immediately voted him as a fully patched member of the Mesa, Arizona charter, although they later denied this. Unfortunately, as Dobbins moved up the ranks, the lifestyle began to strain his family life. I had an argument with my wife. At one point, I came home after being away for an extended period. I walked in like Jaybird Davis walks into my house, and she's like, "You cannot be gone and come here and treat me and our kids like we're street people." Despite acknowledging that the Hells Angels could be dangerous, Dobbins admitted to respecting some members. After his true identity was revealed in 2004, the Hells Angels felt betrayed and directed their threats at his family. Plans to inject him with HIV, gang rape his wife and daughter, and kidnap and murder his son were uncovered. The ATF downplayed the threats, claiming no one had forced Dobbins to go undercover. Even when an arson attack occurred at his Tucson, Arizona home with his family inside, the Bureau didn't take the threat seriously. Though his family survived, their home and belongings were destroyed. Dobbins filed and won a lawsuit against the ATF in 2014. He later wrote a book, No Angel: My Harrowing Undercover Journey to the Inner Circle of the Hells Angels, which became a New York Times bestseller. The book detailed the Hells Angels investigation and its impact on his career and life. Despite the tragic events following his departure, Dobbins now runs a company focused on law enforcement training. Finally, there is the case of David LaBrava. Unlike others who faced hardship after leaving the Hells Angels, LaBrava left in good standing. Known for his role as Happy Loman in the FX series Sons of Anarchy, LaBrava was a real-life member of the Hells Angels. Initially hired as a technical advisor for the show in 2008 to ensure accurate depictions of a motorcycle club, he was later given a role and portrayed the hitman Happy Loman. LaBrava stayed with the Hells Angels until 2019, when he announced his departure via an Instagram post. "I want to say I am no longer a member of the largest motorcycle club in the world, the Hells Angels, MC. The only club I'm a member of now is the human race," he wrote. He added that it was his own decision to leave and that he was no longer a patch holder, considering himself a civilian. Unlike others, LaBrava's exit was amicable, and he has had no negative experiences with the club since. Non-bikers might not understand the allure of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club, but motorcycle enthusiasts are often in awe of the club, eager to join. This respect is linked to the club's storied history. According to the Hells Angels official website, the first club was founded on March 17, 1948, in Fontana, San Bernardino, California. Before then, various motorcycle clubs existed independently. Otto Friedli, a World War II veteran, was credited with founding the club after breaking away from the Pissed Off Bastards Motorcycle Club due to a feud with a rival gang. Another theory suggests that the Hells Angels was founded on November 15, 1951, by Dick White in San Bernardino. White was said to be a member of the Redlands Roadrunners. The club attributes its name to Arvid Olsen, an acquaintance of the founders who served in the Hells Angel Squadron of the Flying Tigers during World War II. The club's official colors, red and white, and its charter, allegedly drawn up in 1950, reflect this heritage. Chapters began to emerge across California, operating independently. The San Francisco chapter formed in 1954, followed by North Sacramento in 1956. Sonny Barger took over leadership from Friedli and created the Oakland chapter in 1957, uniting the chapters under common bylaws. The Hells Angels expanded beyond California, opening an international chapter in New Zealand in 1961. On July 30, 1969, two London chapters were formed, and by 1973, they merged into the London Charter. Canada followed in 1977 with a chapter in Montreal, expanding to other parts of Quebec. However, the Hells Angels didn't quite succeed in taking over the Quebec biking scene, without interference, as there was a violent turf war that left over 160 dead, 300 injured, and over 100 bikers incarcerated. By the end of the 70s, the club already had charters in Australia, and in 1984, Rio de Janeiro had its chapter, making it the first South American country with a HAMC charter. By 1993, the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club had spread across continents and was launched in Johannesburg, South Africa. Turkey became the first Muslim country to have a Hells Angels chapter in 2009. Now, the club has a membership of over 6,467 chapters across 59 countries, making it the largest motorcycle club in the world. However, there was still a veil of mystery over the club, as many from the outside weren't quite sure what went on within. Sometimes, the Hells Angels are depicted as free-spirited men bound by brotherhood and loyalty. On the other hand, they are also depicted as a violent criminal gang, and the murder of an 18-year-old concertgoer by one of their members didn't help this reputation. Hells Angels members were essentially known as drug addicts and barroom fighters. However, law enforcement and intelligence agencies like the United States Department of Justice, the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Criminal Intelligence Service Canada, and even Europol all considered the Hells Angels an organized crime syndicate. Although the Hells Angels claim not to be a racially segregated club, members are often white men. According to Sonny Barger in a 2000 BBC interview, the club as a whole is not racist, but we probably have enough racist members that no black guy is going to get in it. He also said, if you're a motorcycle rider and you're white, you want to join the Hells Angels. If you're black, you want to join the East Bay Dragons. That's how it is, whether anyone likes it or not. We don't have no blacks, and they don't have no whites. While Barger claims the Hells Angels weren't racist, a 1983 incident proved otherwise. The Satan's Angels Motorcycle Club in Vancouver had a black member before it decided to merge with the Hells Angels in 1983. However, the San Francisco and Anchorage chapters threatened to expel the Vancouver chapter when they learned there was a black member. The issue was only resolved when the man decided to change his nationality to Hawaiian. In another case, a chapter in Windsor, England, was only granted official status in 1985 after its only black member had died in police custody. In their support, an African-American biker group known as the Chosen Few Motorcycle Club stated in a 1996 Ebony article that they didn't perceive any racial animosity from members of the Hells Angels. They also said they allowed members of the Hells Angels into their territory, where everyone parties and gets together. The Hells Angels echoed this, stating, "We don't have any Negro members," but maintained that it was because no black individuals had sought membership. It is unclear why many people joined the Hells Angels, but one common factor seems to be a sense of community. In the case of former leader George Christie, he had been drawn by the free-spiritedness of the members and wanted to be part of this close-knit community of bikers. Undercover Agent Jay Dobbins also hinted at this as one of the reasons why he respected members of the club. In a law enforcement conference in El Paso, Dobbins said that the Hells Angels, even with their fearsome reputations, offered members a sense of belonging in society. "You can be, in essence, an unimportant, unknown person," Dobbins said. "When you join one of those gangs and they put that patch on your back, all of a sudden people are paying attention to you. People are buying you drinks, people are giving you drugs, women want to put their arm around your shoulder, you're intimidating, you scare people. And to some people, that's intoxicating," he said. Therefore, it is little wonder why George Christie appeared slightly hurt by this loss of community when he was declared out bad by the club. Another thing that stands out about the Hells Angels is how seriously they expect loyalty from members. Christie appeared to have betrayed the club by leaving, and they made sure he paid for this by not only isolating him from the community, but also ensuring the general public saw him in a negative light. He even went on to serve prison time for crimes he had committed earlier, 3 years after he left the Hells Angels. The same thing played out with Dobbins when he was revealed to be an undercover agent. The threats were just a way for the club to show their disappointment at the betrayal. Despite these acts unveiling the dark side of the Hells Angels, they maintain that they are not a criminal or violent organization. members of the club continue to assert that they are only a group of motorcycle enthusiasts from all over the world who want to ride motorcycles together and organize social events. They insist that crimes committed by any member of the Hells Angels are the sole responsibility of the parties involved and not the club as a whole. Even though the Hells Angels insist on being a social group, there are several instances that have shown the violent nature of the club. First is the tragic case of Meredith Curly Hunter Jr., the 18-year-old American who was stabbed to death by a member of the Hells Angels at the 1969 Altamont Free concert. What makes the death of Meredith Hunter most unfortunate was that the incident was caught on camera and became a central scene in the documentary Gimme Shelter by the Maysles brothers. 18-year-old Hunter was a bubbly teen from Berkeley, California, known for his flashy dress and hard-to-miss afro. In 1969, he attended the infamous Altamont Free concert with his white blonde girlfriend, a friend, and his girlfriend, traveling from Berkeley to the event. His sister, Dixie, had warned him not to attend, as racism was still prevalent in the outer reaches of Alameda County. However, Hunter shrugged it off but armed himself with a .22 Smith & Wesson revolver, just in case he needed protection. It's important to note that the unfortunate incident at the Altamont Free concert could have been avoided had the event been well planned. There were hundreds of thousands of people at the venue, and the stage was set so low that the crowd pressed in, making the stage look small and uncomfortable. Members of the Hells Angels present at the concert saw this and took advantage of the situation, offering to prevent artists from being approached by overzealous fans who attempted to get on the stage. All they needed in exchange for this service was $500 worth of beer. They parked their motorcycles in front of the stage and ensured no one tried to get close. By the time the Rolling Stones mounted the stage later that night, the crowd had become restless and was pressing on the stage. The Hells Angels, already drunk, began throwing their empty beer cans at the restless crowd, which further increased the tension in the air. The lead singer, Mick Jagger, had to pause and speak to the crowd, urging them to calm down and stop pushing. "I can't do any more than just ask you, beg you," he said. "Just to keep it together, you can do it. It's within your power. Everyone, Hells Angels, everybody. Let's just keep ourselves together." Still, the crowd pressed on, and Hunter, with his bright lime green suit, could be spotted in the crowd. After a few minutes of calm, the band started performing again. This time, Hunter climbed up a speaker box next to the stage. He then got into a scuffle with the Hells Angels on guard and was chased back into the crowd, where 4 other angels descended on him. After a few minutes, Hunter, who had been high on drugs, angrily returned to the front of the stage. He was so furious that his girlfriend, Patty Bredhoft, tearfully begged him to move farther back into the crowd with her. From the footage captured, Hunter was seen suddenly lunging at someone in the crowd, drawing what appeared to be a revolver and pointing it in the air. Then, a man wearing a Hells Angels uniform is seen rushing at the teenager with his hand raised, holding what was later identified as a knife. The Hells Angels member, identified as Alan Passaro, proceeded to stab Hunter twice. By the time Hunter's body was recovered, he had been stabbed 5 times in the upper back and was stomped upon by other Hells Angels members. The footage then cuts to Hunter's girlfriend crying at the sight of her boyfriend's body being wrapped up by medical examiners at the scene. In total, 4 people died at the concert, 2 by a hit-and-run car accident, and 1 by an LSD-induced drowning in an irrigation canal. The stabbing of Meredith Hunter gave the Hells Angels a bad reputation as a violent group, and this was worsened after Alan Passaro, the member who had stabbed Hunter, was acquitted of the crime on grounds of self-defense. This was just one of the many instances where the Hells Angels proved to be deadly. Jay Dobbins, in an interview, also talked about how a woman had been murdered by the Hells Angels in Mesa, Arizona. The Hells Angels in Mesa had murdered a woman, an innocent woman. They was in their clubhouse, right? Yeah, they basically recruited her off the street to come to a party. The party got out of hand. She mouthed off in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Man, you don't talk on these dudes in their clubhouse, and you don't insult them." He then narrated what the club did to her. She took a beating in the Mesa clubhouse. They beat her down, and then they stuffed her in the trunk of a car and drove her from Mesa out to Apache Junction, Arizona, which is further east, and cut her head off. These notable events showed how brutal the Hells Angels could be when faced with what was perceived to be disrespect or even betrayal, no matter how they tried to assert their innocence. The Hells Angels have created a bad reputation among law enforcement and intelligence agencies. Their members are constantly caught up in robberies, extortion, drug dealing, murder, gun running, and even prostitution operations. The truth is, you never can know what goes on behind the scenes of this motorcycle club unless you join, and clearly, becoming a member comes with a heavy price. Unless you are bold enough, the tragic fate of leaving the Hells Angels can be greatly terrifying. And if you are not careful, it can cost all that you hold dearly. When a prospect becomes a full-fledged member, they get a vest with the famous logo and name on the back. If one of the bikers gets arrested, he'll hand his vest to a fellow member to avoid tainting it in jail. If they get hurt and need an emergency procedure, they'll do whatever possible to prevent the vest from being cut or torn off. They have a dress code. The guidelines on this one vary a bit from chapter to chapter. Some are not even allowed to wear shorts, no matter how hot it gets. The most common are charters, who wear all black. Some allow blue jeans and camouflage patterns. The color and design codes can help distinguish which charter they belong to. There's an order that they ride in. The road captain and charter president remain at the front of the group. From there, the bikers align based on seniority and rank. The older members will stay closer to the front, followed by newer members, and ending with prospects in the back. They all pull over together. If one of them gets pulled over by a cop, they all stop. A bit intimidating for the cop, I'm sure. It signifies how the brotherhood is linked like family. If you mess with one Hells Angel, you mess with them all. They can't work for a prison. Given the Hells Angels' history with law enforcement, they aren't allowed to work for a prison while in the group. Members also cannot be police officers due to the conflict of interest. The group stands for freedom in the sense that they run by their own rules. So prison guards and law enforcement officers are out of the question. You can't share information about fellow members. If a member were to rat out a fellow brother, they could expect to get kicked out of the group. The Hells Angels website clearly states, "We do not answer questions about members, not even missing ones." Once a Hells Angel, always a Hells Angel. Once you're an official Hells Angel, there's no backing out. Members don't retire, and the only time they exit the group is if they're kicked out for breaking a rule. Your charter essentially becomes a second family. When one of them passes away, everyone unites to honor the memory of their fallen brother. No talking to the media. Since the Hells Angels are very secretive in their activities, none of them are allowed to talk to the media. Harleys only. To be a Hells Angel, you must own a Harley Davidson. Riding only Harleys is a Hells Angels tradition that runs along the same lines as the sacred vest. It holds value because it's a part of what makes them who they are. They ride thousands of miles a year together. According to their website, the Hells Angels ride around 12,000 miles together every year. While Hells Angels are like brothers, their connection is founded on their shared love of motorcycles. They'll happily spend hours on the road, show up to club events. Members who fail to show up to meetings and hangouts indicate to others that they are missing the point of the club. The Biker Brotherhood is known for having a strict attendance code. Those who continually miss events are seen as disrespectful and are not likely to make it past the hanging around phase of recruitment. It's a brotherhood, not a sisterhood. Hells Angels refers to itself as a brotherhood. Thus, you'll only see men with the death head insignias on their back. Though women aren't technically in the club, they do play a major role in it. Many of the Hells Angels have wives and families. If he's going to be a part of the crew, then his partner has to understand the commitment and be okay with the lifestyle and all that comes with it. The Hells Angels official website attributes the official death's head insignia design to Frank Sadilek, past president of the San Francisco Charter. The colors and shape of the early style jacket emblem before 1953 were copied from the insignias of the 85th Fighter Squadron and the 552nd Medium Bomber Squadron. The Hells Angels have a system of patches similar to military medals. The specific meaning of each patch is not publicly known, but the patches identify each biker's specific or significant actions or beliefs. The official colors of the Hells Angels are red lettering displayed on a white background, hence the club's nickname, the Red and White. The patches are worn on leather or denim jackets and vests. Red and white are also used to display the number 81 on many patches, as in Support 81, Route 81. The 8 and 1 stand for the respective positions in the alphabet of H and A. Friends and supporters of the club use these in deference to club rules, which purport to restrict the wearing of Hells Angels imagery to club members. The diamond-shaped 1% patch is also used, displaying 1% in red on a white background with a red marrowed border. The term 1%er is said to be a response to the American Motorcyclist Association (AMA) comment on the Hollister incident to the effect that 99% of motorcyclists were law-abiding citizens and 1% were outlaws. The AMA has no record of such a statement and calls this story apocryphal. Most members wear a rectangular patch, again, white background with red letters and a red marrowed border, identifying their respective charter locations. Another similarly designed patch reads Hells Angels. When applicable, members of the club wear a patch denoting their position or rank within the organization. The patch is rectangular and, like those described above, displays a white background with red letters and a red marrowed border. Some examples of the titles used are President, Vice President, Secretary, Treasurer, and Sergeant at Arms. This patch is usually worn above the charter location patch. Some members also wear an AFFA patch, which stands for Angels Forever. Forever Angels, referring to their lifelong membership in the club. An additional patch worn by select club members consists of 2 Nazi-style SS lightning bolts below the words Filthy Few. Some law enforcement officials claim that the Filthy Few patch is awarded only to those who have committed or are prepared to commit murder on the club's behalf. Hells Angels have denied this interpretation, however, comparing it instead to a merit badge awarded to those who are the first to arrive at a party and the last to leave. According to reports from law enforcement and prosecutors, another patch similar to the Filthy Few patch is the Diquialo patch. Diquialo is a reference to El Diguelo, a bugle call played by the regimental band of Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna's army at the Battle of the Alamo. This patch allegedly signifies that the wearer has fought law enforcement on arrest. There is no common convention as to where the patches are placed on members' jackets/vests. Angels Forever, Forever Angels is also the club's traditional motto. Other Hells Angels slogans include, When we do right, nobody remembers. When we do wrong, nobody forgets. 3 can keep a secret if 2 are dead. And when in doubt, knock 'em out, which was coined by New York City charter member Vincent Big Vinny Girolamo. The Hells Angels incorporated in 1966, trademarking the club's name and 4 symbols. The club filed a trademark infringement lawsuit for the first time on October 26, 1989, when the Hells Angels lodged a federal lawsuit in Los Angeles against Concord New Horizons, which produced the film Nam Angels, and against Media Home Entertainment, which distributed the film on video, over infringements on the club's registered trademarks. The suit was settled out of court. According to the Globe and Mail, the Hells Angels considered seeking an injunction to block the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation from broadcasting the miniseries The Last Chapter because of how closely the biker gang at the center of the series resembled the Hells Angels. Tension filled the air, thick enough to choke on. The outlaws weren't happy, not one bit, and Mel knew it was only a matter of time before the powder keg exploded. Every day became a waiting game, a test of nerves. Mel's brothers looked to him for guidance and strength, but even he had his doubts and fears. Still, he couldn't show weakness, not now. Mel tightened security, ran drills, and prepared for the worst. But what kept us strong was the unity we had with each other. We had a young crew, me being the youngest, Mel reflected. Most of the guys trained back then. There was no MMA, so we were just up pounding on the bags. You had to make sure you were in shape, but you couldn't be so big that you couldn't fight in a bar. Nothing could have prepared them for what came next. June 13, 1994, was a date that would be etched in blood and fire. The Hells Angels clubhouse, their sanctuary and home, was reduced to rubble in an instant. 100 pounds of C4 explosives had delivered a message written in destruction. They put 100 pounds of C4 in a car, shaped it, and drove it up. Our clubhouse was on Grand Avenue, a busy street, and it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, middle of the week. Traffic was going by and everything. They built the bomb in the trunk of this car. By some miracle, no one was inside when the bomb went off. But the message was crystal clear. This was war. Mel stood in the debris, rage boiling inside him. The next move was his, and it would change everything. Retaliation came swift and merciless. Mel knew the rules, an eye for an eye. But this was beyond that. This was an all-out war. We were doing that tit-for-tat thing, Mel said. It became personal. We were running into each other's bars and doing stuff like that. But then, with the bombings, it turned the game around. That was the first of a few that happened. He gathered his most trusted lieutenants, planning in secret. No half measures, no mercy, no survivors. The streets of Chicago ran red as chaos reigned supreme. Shootings, bombings, brutal beatings. No one was safe. We had no clue, man. These guys were using bombs and remote starts. We didn't know how to do that, so we had to figure it out. We were still trying to run into the bars and fight hand-to-hand as they were finding us. The cops were overwhelmed, and soon the feds took notice. But Mel couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. Every attack fueled his rage and determination. In the 90s, it got crazy with the bombings and shootings. It went from playground fights to shooting on motorcycles. We had to keep our guys safe. I have the tombstones tattooed on my arms for the brothers that got killed in that war. When you see a brother you're tight with lying in a casket, and his 16-year-old daughter is saying goodbye and rubbing her father's hair for the last time, it hits different. As the war dragged on, Mel's reputation grew. He was feared on the streets and respected in the underworld. But he was also a prime target for rival gangs and law enforcement alike. The pressure was mounting from all sides. In the midst of the chaos, I never lost sight of my goal, to make the Chicago Hells Angels the most powerful club in the Midwest. But as the body count rose and the feds closed in, I started to wonder if the price of power was too high. I remember standing at the casket with a few brothers, putting his patch over him before we closed it. His daughter's goodbye brought tears to my eyes. I thought, we did this. Our decisions led to this. How do you say time out in a war like this? You don't. You just go with the flow and be part of the environment created around you. Little did Mel know, the biggest battle of his life was yet to come, and it wouldn't be fought on the streets, but in a courtroom. The war had caught the attention of forces far beyond Chicago, and they were about to bring the full weight of the law down on Mel Chancey and his brothers. Brothers, the fall. Blue lights and sirens pierced the night. The law was closing in. Mel knew it was coming. But when you have 2 bombings on one day, that's something they had never seen before. After we hit their clubhouse, that was the full court press. That's when the government came in and said, hey, no more of this. Violence on violence, biker violence on biker violence, they don't like, but it's passable. But when you start Beirooting the city, they come with the full court press. The feds swarmed everywhere, kicking down doors and making arrests. The magic word was RICO. The club's worst nightmare came to life. At the time, Janet Reno was the U.S. Attorney General. We all knew she was no nonsense. She put a team together and said, get both sides. That's how the RICO investigation started. It put the city on edge. She nicknamed the operation Operation Lucifer and put the full court press on us and the outlaws. In 1997, the first RICO indictments hit, and they targeted the outlaws first. They had them on predicate acts, fighting us, the bombing. The guy who placed the bomb flipped for the government later in life, giving them the full story of what happened. Before the indictment hit the Hells Angels, Mel received a 4-year sentence for beating up a DJ who was abusing his ex-girlfriend. I went to prison in '98 for beating that guy up. Remember Dee's story in the house? I beat the guy who was abusing my ex-girlfriend. I kind of took it to a level, and I got a 4-year sentence for that one. So, I'm in state prison in '98, knowing that the RICO case is being put together against us. I'm hearing the buzz from the streets, with people telling me they're building this RICO case on us. Mel watched his empire crumble as brother turned on brother. One of the Hell's henchmen, who hadn't made it to the angel side, flipped. He was a good friend of Mel's, and Mel didn't know he had turned. Mel was the target. His name was Jim, and the authorities told Jim, "We want Mel." Plea deals and witness protection programs shattered the old code of silence. But Mel wouldn't break. He couldn't. Even as the evidence mounted and the charges piled up, he stood firm, a captain going down with his ship. The trial was a media circus, with Mel at the center. He remained defiant to the end, but the verdict was never really in doubt. Guilty on all counts. So, I pled guilty to mail fraud and got 18 months. The day I was released from the state penitentiary, I went into the Sally Port. They switched my handcuffs, and the marshals picked me up and took me to a federal holding facility, then designated me to a federal prison. I really did back-to-back sentences. As they led him away in chains, Mel couldn't help but wonder, was it all worth it? All the blood, all the sacrifice, for what? A patch, a reputation, or something more, something he couldn't yet see? As Mel's sentence neared its end, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. In late 2000, Mel Chansey walked out of federal prison, a free man once more. Chicago's own outlaw motorcycle club, the Hell's Henchmen, was where Mel found his tribe. But respect had to be earned the hard way. They said, you know, the stories, the same guys that showed me how to train heavy and crazy were the same guys that showed me how to do the motorcycle lifestyle. Wow, that's how I stepped into that world. He started as a prospect, the lowest of the low, cleaning, running errands, and taking orders from everyone. It wasn't glamorous, but Mel didn't complain. He had something to prove, not just to the club, but to himself and the world. "How old are you now?" they asked. I said, "It's only been a year and some change. I'm 19. "Man, you're going to age rough. You look older. You want to come in a club?" "I do." "Okay, come on. Let's make it official. You become an official hangaround and a prospect, and then you get voted for your patch." Yeah, so that's how it happened, and that's what I did. I was very eager. When Mel got into that world, he wanted to learn everything about it. He worked harder, trained harder, fought harder. His fists did the talking, and people started listening. Rivals learned to fear him, and brothers learned to trust him. But in that world comes the nonsense, the violence, the tit-for-tat with other clubs. I was into that part. Those guys showed me the violent side of a lifestyle. Slowly but surely, Mel climbed the ranks of the Hell's Henchmen. The older members watched, sizing him up. Was this kid for real, or just another wannabe? Mel's dedication was put to the test time and time again. He ran errands that often skirted the edge of legality. I would be out every night as a prospect, doing all this stuff. I stood watch during deals that I knew better than to ask about. And when rival gangs came knocking, I was always first in line to defend my brothers. "Learned it fast and I watched it," Mel said. "I watched how some of these guys came right in, and when it was time to fight and throw hands, there was no question about it." Finally, after months of grueling tests and trials, the moment Mel had been waiting for arrived. They called him to the front of the clubhouse. The air was thick with anticipation. The president, a grizzled old biker with more scars than teeth, looked Mel up and down. For a moment, the world stood still. Then, with a gruff nod, he handed Mel his colors. Mel Chansey was now a full-patch member of the Hell's Henchmen. "I got my patch right before I was 21, Mel recalled.